Okay, we are at 7 o'clock sharp here, so I'm just going to do a roll call here so we can get moving. I see Councillor Beddoes, Councillor Bateman, Councillor Lajeunesse, Councillor St. Pierre. Are you on the line?
I'm with you, yes.
Okay, can you turn your video on? There you are.
It is on.
Okay, it's just how they move. You need to say something so that you can move into the screen.
Gotcha.
Councillor McMath, are you online?
I'm just admitting her now.
Okay, Councillor McMath is just joining us. Councillor Logans, are you on the line?
No, I don't see her in the meeting.
Okay. I'll just wait. Oh, there she is. Okay, Councillor McMath and Councillor Logans, can you just maybe say hello and then your videos will appear on the screen.
Hello. Hi. How is everyone?
That's good. You're both there. I just don't see you.
Maybe if I do a dance.
Maybe.
Or turn your camera on.
There, it worked. That worked. That worked, Councillor Logans. Thank you. Councillor McMath, you may need to do something similar.
I have to dance.
See, it works. See, there. I don't know. I don't get that, but
there's a method to my madness.
There is. So, okay. So I'll just check with staff. Are we good to commence the meeting?
Yes, Your Worship. Go ahead.
Okay. That's wonderful. So good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us on Monday, December 7th for our Committee of the Whole. I do wish to acknowledge that we are broadcasting virtually from the territory of the Sauk Nation, and we have all of Council with us tonight, which is wonderful. So thank you. Council, we are in Committee of the Whole, but we still have to deal with our ministerial orders and such. And of course, with cows, we just require the one mover. So our first item here is that the Committee of the Whole is holding this meeting without members of the public in attendance under Ministerial Order M192, as council chambers cannot safely accommodate the unknown number of public participants wishing to attend, and that the Committee of the Whole is committed to ensuring openness, transparency, accessibility, and accountability through the submission of written comments and the provision of live and recorded broadcasts of the meeting. Councillor,
I'd like to move it for the cow.
Okay, Councillor Logans is moving it for the cow. Any discussion? Councillor Beddoes, I saw you had your hand up. Was there any discussion, or are you just moving it, I guess? Okay, so I will call the question then. All those in favor, please. And that's all in favor, none opposed, so that carries unanimously. Our first item of the business, or item 4, is approval of tonight's agenda. So look for a motion that the agenda for December 7th Committee of the Whole be adopted as circulated.
Excuse me, Your Worship, with the amendment of the supplementary items.
Yes, correct, with the inclusion of supplementary information provided on the separate package.
Excuse me, Mayor, I lost audio. Can you now hear me? I never heard any of that first opening until now. I had to unplug my headset.
Okay, no, I can definitely hear you now.
Okay.
And we're just in the middle of approving the agenda, Councillor Beddoes.
Thank you.
Okay, so look for a mover of the agenda as amended with supplementary. Moved by Councillor St. Pierre. Okay, any questions? All those in favor, please. And that's everyone, so none opposed. That carries unanimously. So for reports, I'm just going to ask our corporate officer to confirm if we have any residents on the phone or registered to speak through Teams.
Thank you, Your Worship. No, we do not. Nobody registered to join the Teams meeting nor to join by telephone.
Okay, and I just wanted to check in with council. Our practice has been, as we receive item of correspondence, that we sort of have been reading out the first 2 minutes of those items. But in regards to the tree management bylaw, there's a very large number of items, and in the supplementary information, those were some additional items that rolled in after the deadline. So, and then they were added in separately. So, but they were all part of that public consultation piece. Is council comfortable that we just accept that block of correspondence? Because otherwise I would feel we would need to read them all out. Councillor Logans?
I'm completely comfortable with that because I know most other municipalities do it that way anyhow. They do rely on the fact that council has gone through them themselves and read them, and they all attest to that as part of the motion and then accept them.
Okay, because it would otherwise be a lot of correspondence to read out. So I just wanted to do that check-in and leave it at that. Councillor Beddoes? I can't hear you now. Is he muted?
Councillor Beddoes, you're muted.
You're muted. Oh,
It's all right. I had to do away with my headset for some reason. Now I'm on this. I'm not sure I had an opportunity to read all of those because I asked for some things to put in my box and they weren't there because I had to go pick up a paper copy. And I'll have to go on and have a look and see what's come in because I thought that they were going to be here tonight, but maybe not. So I have to go on a supplement agenda, right?
Yeah, but what I'm saying though is with the other public submissions, there's a very large number. So to me, it's the case we would have to read all of them and not just the few that were late. Like if we were going to read them out, it would kind of be an all or none.
Yeah,
So-
understood. Yeah, by looking at the list here, I've got them all. So, okay, I'm okay with it.
Okay, good. Thank you. Just wanting to check in on that.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're going to move into our report section. And the first one is item 5.1, which is the development of a waste management strategy. So there's the report, but I'll turn this over to staff, please, for their presentation.
Thank you, Your Worship. It's Laura Hooper here. I'm in one of the boxes in the corner. So I will share my screen in a moment. Just want to do an audio check, make sure everyone can hear me. We're good. Okay. Just switching over. Okay, can everybody see my screen?
I can.
I'll just assume then that everybody else can. So thank you, Your Worship. The presentation tonight is about a waste management strategy. Waste management is a very complex issue, and in the development of a Maiden-Sooke waste management strategy really requires a lot of careful consideration. And because it is such a complex issue, we decided that breaking it down into a number of waste streams within the district, like kitchen scraps, black waste, which is kitchen scraps and black waste or garbage, yard waste, large recyclables, and household hazardous wastes, because that's really the complete waste stream, notwithstanding recyclables that are being picked up by the CRD. So the presentation or the recommendation in front of you today is to really give staff some direction and endorse a plan to develop a solid waste management strategy. We acknowledge that public consultation will be required to provide some education to the public, but also to determine the desired levels of service in the community. We propose putting out an expression of interest to industry to determine the extent of companies and their capacities that are interested in potentially providing a service for contracting this kind of service, depending on what council decides, to Sooke. We also propose developing at the same time comprehensive business plans to analyze the logistics and costs for the District of Sooke to provide that service in-house. So just a little bit of context before I go any further. The Environmental Management Act puts the responsibility of disposing or managing wastes into the hands of the regional district. In the CRD, the regional district looks after your recyclables, but leaves the management of the other waste streams that I already mentioned to the individual local governments. We have been brought up this issue in Sooke because of the ongoing issues that happen with backyard burning, illegal dumping, wildlife conflicts. The idea of improving economic development by creating local jobs, but also because of the GHG emissions being provided by a number of service providers and the requirements of some of our locals to travel all the way to Heartland to do some of their hazardous waste recycles. As I mentioned, the existing services for recycling is provided by the CRD, but services for the other waste streams are provided by private haulers, either through curbside collection or for waste transfer stations. Some of these waste transfer stations occur in Souk on Maryland Place, but some also are outside the district of Souk, say in Otter Point for yard waste and in Langford and beyond. As I mentioned, the service delivery models in the CRD are also really varied. Some municipalities provide all of that waste management, say like Oak Bay, but other municipalities such as ours currently don't provide any of those services. And these services, depending on the level of service provided, can range up into about $280 to $360 per year per single family dwelling. So the purpose of the report today is not only, as per Council's resolution last year, to start talking about garbage collection and kitchen scraps collection or management, but also to talk about yard waste as it relates to backyard burning and to dumping, but also those large recyclable items that we're seeing, say, in calls for service for the dumped sofas, mattresses, those larger items. But also to the household hazardous waste that we can sometimes see in our storm drains and therefore have environmental impacts, and in our wastewater treatment facility, which also impacts the health of that facility. Staff proposes a 4-stage strategy for coming up with a waste management strategy. So a strategy for how we're going to manage our waste in Souk. And that first one is about public engagement. We're all about engagement lately, and it's an important thing, especially in this situation. We really need to get a gauge of what the public really wants. We propose doing this public engagement just after the engagement for the OCP on the growth projections, and sort of dovetail just after that. We also suggest that we put out that expression of interest, like I mentioned earlier, to gauge to see what to see what the interest is for a third party to come and provide various services, depending on council's wishes, to the district. We also, depending on council's direction, propose developing a business plan for each of those waste streams. We could develop a business plan for the collection of waste ourselves in black waste and curbside collection, or the development of a plan to do yard waste collection at Public Works Yard, for example. So it's staff's expectation that depending on council's direction, we can develop a number of business plans over the next 6 to 8 to 12 months and come up with a draft strategy for your consideration and endorsement. We expect that that draft strategy will be mostly done in-house, but we will need the expertise of a consultant. That's reflected in the existing draft budget that is in front of council at this moment. It's for about $75,000, but we don't by any means expect to spend all of that on consultants, but we would also use some of it for engagement, etc. It's a really good placeholder to get all of this work done, depending on council's engagement. The last thing before I put this back to you, Your Worship, and to council, is to tell you a little bit about what we're thinking about with these business plans. Waste management's a really complex business, and as the Director of Operations in Esquimalt said, it's a really expensive sport to get into. So we really need to think about the delivery model for each waste stream and whether we really want to get into that business or not. We would have to look at those delivery models, collection and disposal logistics, like frequency of service, route development, waste transfer. The scope of service, are we going to provide service if we want to, residential, multifamily, industrial, commercial, etc. Those capital costs, if we decide we want to do this in-house, what is it going to cost the taxpayers? There's a lot of risk with this kind of an expensive endeavor, so we want to make sure that we're really dialing in those costs and having a really good idea of what we're getting into. Capital finance options. The Director of Finance could probably speak better to this, but there are options for financing the purchase of equipment, whether it be bins or trucks or compactors. The operational costs of that collection model, say we were doing a yard waste management at the Public Works yard, how much that would it cost to keep staff on those activities, depending on the frequency of service. But also, how do we recover our costs? Do we put it as a property tax increase and utility charge? And then finally, any policies and service establishing bylaw implications. Are we going to allow people to opt out, etc.? So it's a lot of information. It's a really complex endeavor. But what staff's really looking for from council today is that you endorse the plan, first of all, for that solid waste management strategy over the next 12 months so that we can be positioned for grant opportunities, we can be positioned for budget process in the fall of next year, but also to narrow down what waste streams you really want us to focus on. It might be all of those waste streams, or it might be a select few, or alternately none of those things. So, Your Worship, that's the end of the formal presentation. I will now stop sharing my screen, I hope.
Thank you very much, Ms. Hooper, for the PowerPoint and for all your work going into this report. I know that it was a priority item that came out just this fall, so thank you for moving on it so quickly. So we'll turn it over just to any questions from either the written or presented report here. So since I can see you all, I'm going to go with hands, starting with Councillor St. Pierre, please. Oh, I don't see Councillor Bateman, so you'll just need to turn your video. Oh, I do. Okay, never mind. Councillor St. Pierre, go ahead, please.
Just a couple questions for staff, through your worship. One was that in the report, I noticed that Langford, Machosen, North Saanich, well, North Saanich and Central Saanich had very limited service, I think drop-off only, but Langford seemingly had no services. And I was curious about how they manage their garbage, given that they certainly produce a lot more than we do.
Yeah.
So that was one question. The other question was that our sewage treatment plant, I know, is actually using centrifuge to basically draw the moisture out and then send truckloads of material to Heartland, and then we're paying, I think it's around $2,000 a week or something. It's actually quite a large amount. I was wondering if that was also being considered, because I didn't see it amongst the bulleted waste stream types to be dealt with in the waste management plan. And I was wondering whether or not, in terms of dealing with that sort of waste and kitchen waste and yard waste, we might be considering a business plan that would include a composter or a composting facility that would produce jobs and potentially a product. So there's my questions. Thank you.
So thank you, through your worship, to Councillor St. Pierre. The first question that you raised was regarding Langford, and currently Langford does not provide any waste management for its citizens. It's exactly like Souk. It is left to private haulers, private collectors, etc. The second part of your question, I will defer to the Director of Operations, but as it is a complicated endeavor, but currently, for the details, he could answer that. We don't intend to complicate the matters with that waste stream because of the different regulations around it. Mr. Carter, would you like to add to that?
Yeah, thanks, Ms. Hooper. Through your worship to council, so with the biosolids that are produced down at the wastewater plant, they're currently going to Heartland, but the CRD is developing a biosolids treatment facility, so they will specifically have to go to that treatment facility. The amount of cost based on the capacity that we're actually producing down there would not be feasible for us to try and get into the composting facility for biosolids independently. As Ms. Hooper's indicated, getting into the waste business is complex and it's a very expensive sport to get into. We're proposing bringing through business plans to show council what these look like and what the cost implications are. But if we were putting on top of that to try and get into a composting facility on top of that, it would, I believe the cost would be substantial and it would not be a feasible venture to pursue.
Okay, does that answer your questions, Councillor St. Pierre? And I see you, Councillor Beddoes. Yep, okay, go ahead, Councillor Beddoes.
Yeah, I guess I'm a little bit confused because I thought the idea with garbage collection is that we would contract it out, but everybody would have to buy into it on the municipality on a bi-weekly service. I cannot understand how that is so complicated. If we collect the money on our taxes, and I think somebody mentioned $280 or $360 a year for what people that have their garbage picked up now probably pay something along that. I'm not sure exactly. But is the idea of, I don't see us buying trucks, but contracting it out, would that be a consideration?
Yeah, Ms. Hooper, do you want to address that, or do you want me to speak to that?
Through your worship, I'm happy to answer that question. Councillor Beddoes, that's the purpose of this report, is to receive direction from council on whether you would like us to go and do an expression of interest to do that contracting out, or rather would you like us to consider the options for bringing that in-house and therefore buying the trucks and developing the routes, etc. So that's exactly the matter at hand.
Okay, I'd be happy to speak to it when the opportunity to speak to that comes up. Right now, we're just asking questions, I believe. Is that correct, Mayor?
Yeah, we are in committee of the whole, so it's a bit more of a relaxed setting, but I'll just sort of get questions going first before we put a resolution forward. So anything from Councillor Logans, McMath, Lajeunesse, or Bateman?
Yeah.
I can't. There's Councillor Bateman.
Councillor Bateman will jump in. I just a question around, communities obviously are evolving all the time, and they reach a sweet spot where municipal collection service does become a logical thing. Is there an average for a Canadian community? Is it 25,000 people, or it varies widely?
Through your worship to Councillor Bateman, I can speak to that, and it is really dependent on the community and its geographical location and where it is in proximity to transfer stations, etc., as well as larger municipalities where they can share services like that or work in conjunction with each other. Small town I was from previously here, we did everything in-house. We had all our trucks, we did all the recycling, we partnered with Recycle BC. It's very complex and it is very expensive. It can be accomplished in towns of all sizes. And to further speak to Councillor Beddoes' comments, right now, there are companies. There are a few companies that are providing the waste collection services. They provide the option, some of them, to collect organics as well as the black waste. And as Ms. Hooper has indicated, the first part of our strategy is to go out for expressions of interest. What this is going to do, it's going to allow the companies that actually have the capacity for a single company to streamline this service within the district, where we would look at sort of collecting a tax rate or a utility charge for the service and mandating residents to do that. Where it gets complicated is it will have implications on the business community, because there are only so many companies that will have the capacity. Some will not. So there will be implications to that. Further with that, when you get into mandating the service, you could mandate the service for the garbage collection, but you will have just as much controversy, I believe, if you get into mandating the kitchen scraps, because of the amount of people that are actually going to be able to compost on site and will want to opt out of that service. So that's where it becomes an extremely complicated business when you start taking it in-house. In terms of the yard waste, that is a service which we believe may help or work against the burning or excessive burning in the community. But it is a good point to make that there is a company that does take yard waste in town. And if the mandate of council was to go beyond the scope of that company, it is also an avenue that I would not suggest going down. It would be going into larger yard waste things such as 8-inch to 10-inch trees. If that is the intent, that is a whole different story of a business that you want to get into, and not many municipalities will get into the chipping business, because it is quite a dangerous venture for staff to engage in.
Interesting. Okay. Councillor Bateman, is that finished for you? I see Councillor
Well,
McMath now.
I could throw in another question quickly here. I know the CRD is doing its a solid waste management strategy at the very moment. They put out a draft plan, and they have we all have until January 15th to respond to that plan. I'm wondering if the district itself is formally engaged in this current CRD waste management strategy.
Through your worship to Councillor Bateman, yes, we are. Staff is actively on the Intermunicipal Waste Management Committee and has received that feedback solicitation.
Okay.
Councillor McMath?
We're here because we're looking at imposing more restrictions on burning, but does it need to be so cumbersome or so big? Like, could we just not start with like a collection like twice at the end of year, like an opportunity or a drop off for people rather than it being a complete district service? Like, can we scale this back a bit?
This would be like for yard waste, Councillor McMath?
Yeah.
Okay. Staff?
Through your worship to Councillor McMath, we can do pretty much anything that council desires. We could do anything from a twice a year collection or drop off. The district of Esquimalt does a daily drop off. It's open 6 or 7 days a week, but there's other organizations such as North Saanich that do it, or sorry, not North Saanich, Colwood, that allows people to drop off once a week in the high season when the grass is actively growing, and then every second or third week in the lower seasons for branches and twigs. So there's a whole gambit of options, and that's where staff is looking for that direction.
Okay, great. For me, that's more what I'm interested in. I don't think it's really the larger scale stuff that you're talking about. I don't think staff have the feasibility or the time, and we don't have the resources for that. So I think that's where we should be starting right now.
Through your worship, what I forgot to mention that it's also possible that that be an in-house service or a contracted out service. It's not something that we need necessarily assign staff to.
Okay. So my question was sort of similar in terms of, you know, with going full out just seems like a lot to really just do. It was more, how do you deter, you know, like sometimes when there's scrap metal bins, that works really well when fundraisers do that, but then sometimes the junk appears after the bin has gone and sits there until the next time. So is there some way, and I don't want to take away from those that benefit from the fundraising that happens, but some way of working together to communicate that that is an option that's coming is very helpful, because often like, oh, there's the bin and we got to get stuff into it, and then you miss it, and then what do you do with it? There's also, how do you deter the illegal dumping that is so often a problem, and it's dumping of everything from household waste to even yard debris that ends up in parks in different subdivisions, or empty lots, I suppose, where it's just all sort of ditched out. That creates a problem. And then I know some communities do that twice a year. You can anything goes type of thing where there's a certain date and you can put out the old couch or the old chair or the whatever, and it goes out. And sometimes residents use that as a way to sort of exchange items, which is fine. And then the municipality comes in and just picks it all up, and it's like once a year or something. I know that some municipalities have stopped it. Maybe I don't know the rationale why it did. And then once in Souk, we had a toxic roundup day type of, I forget what it was called, but it's where there was an event where if you had those hazardous chemicals lurking about your house, you could just take them all and put them into the bin and get rid of them. And then it was a way to save it from going down the storm drains or down the drains and the like. So that protected our wastewater plant. Like, those were all really good think I can't remember what it was called, but it was a really good event for over a weekend. So yeah, just sort of looking at that, because I know some households do excellent. They're at net zero for waste, and others it differs. So this is where having one size fits all, I think, would be very challenging with households. Everyone's needs are a little bit different. Mr. Carter.
So to try and address this, it is a really complex issue. From what I've just heard, the business plans to come forward with a strategy for the large recyclable items, as well as the toxic waste roundup, is probably the easiest of them all to come up with. And myself and Ms. Hooper can bring those kind of plans and options forward through this plan. A difficult one, I guess it's just to get council's direction on what they're looking for, is if we are to engage in looking at options for yard waste, are we looking at providing more so of a service than the existing company does in town? Are we just looking at providing a couple days of the year for yard waste? Or are we looking at providing that service sort of, as Ms. Hooper has said, like as a weekly service or ongoing drop-off service? So I guess the large items and the toxic waste are easy for us to bring forward options. The yard waste, we're looking for direction on as to what council's intentions are in terms of the service delivery and level of service that we're looking for. When it comes down to the garbage as well as organic waste, the direction we're looking for is council satisfied with the service that's being provided by multiple companies? Or are they looking for staff to go out for expressions of interest in order to streamline those services? And then I guess the big picture and the more complex issue is if council wants to give staff direction to investigate a full-on business plan that would substantially take the garbage collection as well as the organic waste in-house. It is more of a complex issue. It can be done. There will be substantial cost implications, but it's possibilities for us to look at and consider and bring forward for council to look at these options. I guess it would be easy if we could just sort of go through them one at a time and sort of hear what council has to say and what direction they'd like us to go for each of the streams.
Okay, so thank you for that, Mr. Carter. So I'll open it up just for some feedback from council on that. I see Councillor Beddoes, and then I'll go to Councillor Lajeunesse. I think you're muted, Councillor Beddoes.
There we go.
There we go.
All right, my apologies. Yeah, I don't think it was ever the intent that we were going to bring in-house by our own trucks. The garbage collection to me on a bi-weekly basis is the most important, and then the garden waste that can be done the first Saturday of every month for May, June, July, and August, and that would probably do it. Now the reason I say the garbage collection is right now I figure we got about 75% of the people now are getting their garbage picked up. And God knows where the rest of it's going, but I know it's going in gutters, ditches, in the little boxes around. So if we had bi-weekly garbage pickup mandatory for everybody, I think it would drastically reduce the garbage that's floating around the soup. So those are the two things that I'd be interested in pursuing. Again, keep it simple. I don't buy a bunch of equipment, but the garbage collection every 2 weeks on a contract, and we don't have to buy anything, just have to collect the taxes and pay the contractor. And any contractor that I understand would be very happy not to have accounts receivable. They're picking up for every household in Souk, and it's a flat rate, and they don't have to send bills out and collect money. So the other ones, you know, kitchen scraps and picking up televisions and things like that, we can leave that for another time. The people can figure that one out themselves. kitchen scraps are already looked after by the CRD, and the big items like couches and stuff like that, well, I don't think it's as a huge problem. We start small and work up. But I'm interested in hearing the other councillors on, especially the yard waste, because I know Councillor McMath is big on not having it burned in the backyard. So that's my 2 bits worth. Thank you.
Okay, I just want to correct you though, Councillor Beddoes, that the CRD does not pick up kitchen waste. So that's picked up by a private hauler the same time that your garbage is picked up.
Okay, sorry, I thought that all fell under the CRD.
No, it's
But-
not a blue box item. It's so they'll come by and get your paper, glass.
Yes, sorry, I stand corrected. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
Yes, so the companies that pick up the garbage also be responsible for those scraps. They do it now. So if you put a contract out to do both of them, I don't see a big change. So yeah, I'm incorrect in that. Thank you.
Okay, so Councillor Lajeunesse and McMath, please.
Yeah, I think we should scrap the idea of having garbage pickup, mainly because we have 2 or 3 different contractors now that have established businesses, and I really do not want to put anybody out of business and take business out of private hands. We have a couple of companies that do a fabulous job. They have relationships with many of our residents, and we don't have the population density, I don't think, to make this work for the taxpayers. I pay about the same as what staff has outlined in the report, and I deal with everything on site, and I think that's what people have done. We're not a major metropolis where we can afford to have our own garbage trucks running around, and I like the fact that we can support local industry.
Thank you. Councillor McMath?
I don't think we need garbage collection at all. I don't know what all the garbage is that Councillor Beddoes is talking about in the community. And same thing like with people burning garbage. It's like dumping or burning garbage is not legal. So they're going to break the rules. They're going to break the rules. It's not enough to justify us bringing that in. I do want us to have staff bring back the costs for yard waste drop-offs, because that's what instigated this conversation in the first place, because we're looking at imposing those burning restrictions with everything that's going on. So it's the yard waste piece that was missing for everybody. We don't need the large business plan, kitchen scraps, things like that. I wouldn't mind looking at like a once a year, twice a year drop off for larger items. But I think just us focusing on the yard waste, that's the thing that we should be targeting right now.
Councillor Logans? Logans, then St. Pierre, please.
Thank you. I have been a bit quiet because I think I'm pretty decided on this one as well. I too am not interested in looking at the larger garbage collection drop-off situation, but the yard waste would be great to see different or potential avenues for that. And I think that a business plan for the large and toxic would be great, since staff do feel that would be an easy task. So if we could see what that might look like, why not? So I'm definitely in support of that, and also getting more information on the yard and garden material portion. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor St. Pierre?
I don't think any of us are interested in taking on large amounts of infrastructure or increasing costs too much. I do think that looking at all the various pieces is worthwhile, but I think that we're going to have to get creative to have that bait and souk solution. So I do think that, has been mentioned, large item pickup is interesting if we could do it. Toxic pickup is interesting if we could do it. Having some sort of service for yard waste so that we can actually provide people with an option so they don't have to burn would be useful. We've talked about that. And I do agree with Councillor Beddoes that at least looking at a business plan in terms of whether or not the service providers that are already in existence would like to work with the district to reduce their administrative costs and provide a service that would allow for dumping not to happen. And I do have some direct experience with dumping. Along Phillips Road, we have our property and we have a garbage mine because we have a nice drop off where people have been dumping for quite some time. So that material filters onto our property. We also have plastic all over our property that we pick up on a regular basis. So speaking from my own personal experience, we do have a small problem as far as that goes that could be addressed potentially if people have a better option than to simply dump it on our property. So that would be nice.
Thank you, councillors. Councillor Bateman, please.
Yeah, I'll join the chorus, and I agree that it's far too premature to consider a municipal service, given that we have soup disposal and we have Alpine under its new arrangement with this company GFL. So I'm among the 30% who don't have regular garbage pickup, Councillor Beddoes. I don't dump it. I do take it every couple of months to the transfer station. And I think many of us do that, judging by the lineup when I get there. I think, yeah, I'd love to hear some best practices about yard waste disposal. If Mr. Carter's correct, the chipping piece might not be something we want to do. I wonder what they do in Otter Point, for example. As for large item recyclables, I have some experience with that as one of the check signers for the district, and I do see occasionally these pretty remarkable bills come through for things such as drywall, which might have some asbestos in it, which requires all sorts of hazardous protocols. And so, yeah, it would be good to see something like that happen. There is an example, and I think the mayor alluded to this. I think it was, I'm not sure it was Oak Bay, but somewhere they had Free Stuff Saturday. And everyone put their big items at the end of their driveways. Everyone was driving around town, checking it out, taking it away. And if it wasn't taken the next day or a couple of days later, the municipality came and hauled it out. So in that way, you're recycling the 5 R's and moving forward. And as for hazardous waste, I agree that the drive to Heartland is a long one. We have a bunch of stuff here in the garage that if we could take it once or twice a year to the municipal hall for pickup, that would be fantastic. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Bateman. So just some comments from myself is I do agree with most of council in that I think just to leave the garbage as it is. I think residents have a choice. They can choose the date, the service, the frequency. If they don't like one provider, they have an option to choose another. They're dissatisfied, they can switch back and then customize based on their changing household needs. I do like the large item possibility and the toxic materials. Things like batteries should not go into garbage, but you need to collect. You can't put them into recycling. So sometimes I wonder if they get snuck into garbage or not. So like for those sorts of things that can't be, what I'm sort of interested in, what cannot go in the garbage and what isn't being picked up by the CRD on Mondays for recycling, like those other things like batteries, the toxic materials, the large items that are too big, what would that look like? And in terms of yard waste is, I know Councillor Beddoes sort of listed off May to September, but I kind of disagree because the best time to prune and cut back your trees is in the winter time. So then that's when you start to accumulate the twigs and brushes, you do your fall cleanup. Like, so that's where I would like to see that explored. And of course, every yard is different in terms of what it produces and how much can be composted. So I like to look at the yard waste pickup because that's where there isn't one available. So this is where, you know, you see stuff put into adjacent parks and subdivisions and the like. So is there an option to have something like that done? Is there a way to work earlier this year? I think a division of Transition Suit did like a free cycle event where you would post items that you had that you were willing to donate, and you could put pictures of them and put them out, and that's where folks could come around and take what they liked. And then of course then it's up to the homeowner to deal with whatever is left behind, but to examine that. And right now I don't think our collection bins at the donation bins that are out there are even collecting, but I noticed that there's a large amount of stuff accumulating around these bins. So again, it's kind of sad that the thrift stores are having a tough time with COVID, but all of that stuff just ends up in the landfill. Like trying to message out not to bring it there, it's all well intended, but it's all going to the landfill because it's just sitting out there in the elements. So just sort of looking at that's sort of where I would sit, is those sort of awkward items that you're sort of stuck with. So much the same as what others have said. So does that, Councillor Lajeunesse, I see your hand, I believe.
Yeah, I was thinking that maybe like for the large item pickup and yard waste, if we did have 2 or 3 days a year or whatever that we offered to collect those items, and we were to hire a contractor to go around and do that, how do we know how much stuff we're going to have on those days? Like if every house in Souk decides to get a new couch on the same day or in the same year, that could be a huge bill to the district. And maybe if there's a way that we can ask people to register and say, this is what I have and this is what I want to get rid of, just so we have a little bit of a clue what we're getting into here, because it seems a little bit scary just to open it up and say, on this day, leave all your crap on the side of the road and we'll pick it up.
Yeah, that would be an expensive endeavor, and I think that could be why some places have stopped it, because then you'll have, it comes to a fairness piece, you'll have some households that never get rid of anything but are now paying a portion of their taxes to deal with the collection of someone else's junk. So,
and they'll collect things from their friends in other municipalities too. Say, yeah, bring it to my place, I'll get rid of it.
yeah, so I think that's part of, I know our staff have connections with other municipalities in terms of what is practical here and what can we do, and see what makes the most logical sense for us. Mr. Carter? You're muted, Mr. Carter.
Thanks. Sorry, through your worship, just for clarification for Ms. Hooper, just so for some more clear direction here, what I'm hearing is that council is satisfied with using a hybrid of the existing businesses to collect solid waste as well as kitchen scraps. And there is no desire for staff to go out to industry to streamline these services. So it would be sort of left up to the homeowners and property owners to engage or not engage the services. If we were to streamline and go out to industry, it would be very difficult to have multiple companies do it. It would be sort of the companies that had capacity to do that and to provide both those services. So just for clarification, we're hearing that council would not like staff to go out to industry for expressions of interest, to stay with the solid waste services through the hybrid industries, and not to complete a complex business plan to take the services for organic and garbage collection, not to provide that business plan to do it in-house. Just looking for clarification on that.
Councillor Beddoes?
Yeah, go ahead. I'm not muted now. I just wanted to comment on that, and I mean, I'm not blind. I can see the writing on the wall when it comes to garbage collection, And I'm okay with that. I mean, I'm not totally disappointed with the way that the two companies that are doing it now. I hope Councillor Bateman didn't think that I meant that he threw his garbage in the ditch. I'm sure that would be the last thing he'd ever want to do. But I still think there's some movement on garden and waste material. If we could have a drop-off place once a month, and again, I didn't mean to imply any specific timeline, just that we don't need it every weekend. Once a month for every month throughout the year is fine with me as well. And I think that'd be very manageable for our staff to do that. And you know, they can collect it there over a period of time and then ship it off to wherever they ship it off to, maybe once or twice a year if our yard will accept that. So I'll sort of drop my want for garbage collection because I'm not going to win that one. And but that's okay. I value the opinions of everybody and what they said about that. So I'd like to sort of narrow in on the garden waste weekly pickup or monthly. Yeah, weekly or monthly, whatever works. So that's my suggestion.
Yeah, thank you for that, Councillor Beddoes, and I appreciate you bringing this forward because it's a conversation. At least now we understand more why we are or why we are not doing a certain service, and this helps sort of provide that feedback onwards to our constituents. So sort of collecting what I've heard from council is what Councillor Beddoes had said in regards to yard waste, say monthly drop off. I'm curious what pickup might look like. I know still it's a number of different private haulers that will, you know, got junk will haul type of thing. So it varies. So it may we may just have to look at drop off only, but also what about the roundup of toxic materials and the other sort of large item piece? What would that look like? Sort of the easier ones also that staff had introduced earlier, like, is that possible? And perhaps I think that's kind of what I feel I've heard from everyone. Is that correct, Councillor Lajeunesse?
Yeah, I think you summed it up well. I think that one thing that, and I'm sure staff will take care of this, but any companies that we do contract to look after this, we want to make sure they're vetted properly to make sure that they're not taking the stuff out and just dumping it in the bush too.
Well, I think that would be part of our expectation, is that whatever they take and deal with appropriately. So don't just take all our toxic materials and drive them further west. Like, they need to go and be disposed of properly through Heartland.
Dump the oil in the creek.
Yeah, no, we don't want to see that. So it's more just the handling of the materials, and ideally using in terms of GHG emissions, not driving them across the country or into another country, but dealing them at our, you know, at our regional facility here at the CRD. Yeah, you know, that's always part of it when, you know, for me is, where does it start and where does it end? And I think in calculating the GHG commission, you have to take that into consideration. Where does the provider take it to and where does it end there? Councillor St. Pierre?
Just like to note that some of this may simply be education. For example, I believe that Home Hardware still accepts light bulbs and batteries. So for some goods, there's a place to drop off even now, but it may be that people don't know about it.
No, that's a good point. And I think this is where it would be nice also perhaps if staff could provide, and we could work on some sort of an information circular. So it's, as Councillor St. Pierre has indicated, what Home Hardware collects back. Without COVID, the pharmacies would even take your unused medications. So that type of information is very helpful. You just bring it in a Ziploc bag, or, you know, it's my understanding that the cannabis retailers will recycle the packaging from products. So just as different options that are available to our community and how they're used, and also just what some of our local groups like the Free Cycle group are doing and how we can sort of work together to promote those options. Mr. Carter.
Thanks, Your Worship. So just for clarification, staff can bring back an amended plan to develop this strategy for council's consideration. And what we're hearing today is to leave the garbage and organic collection status quo as is being done by industry right now, to not go out for expressions of interest for those two streams, and to investigate business plans that will include yard waste, potential drop-off and collection options, as well as large item recyclables and toxic waste roundup. And then included in our public consultation for those set streams, to include an educational component to sort of provide education to the public on where these streams can be taken and some different options, as well as to get their feedback on the services we'll be investigating and streams we'll be investigating.
Yep. Councillor McMath?
I think I would prefer at this point for staff just to come back with quotes on the options that we've asked for before we talk about any of the other stuff.
Does that work for everybody? Mr. Carter?
So through Your Worship to Councillor McMath, unless we're being really specific on exactly what we're looking at for those streams, the business options for those streams, for doing alternate sort of frequencies for the yard waste drop off versus collection, they have to be investigated unless there is a very specific, we want only 1 day a year, we want only these items looked at. That's sort of the purpose of the business case, is to investigate those different options for council consideration. Unless there's specific direction on an exact frequency and an exact item, it's very hard to provide a specific quote for that.
Sorry, I don't follow why it's so challenging there. So can you not have like three different options, like 3 different frequencies, like you're doing it weekly, monthly, twice a year, and then bring those back?
Through Your Worship to Councillor McMath, yes, and that's the intention of a business plan, is a business plan to look at those few options for that stream, for the yard waste collection, as well as for the large item recyclables and toxic items.
Okay, but when you say business plan, like you're touching on other items like public education and these other pieces. And before we go to those pieces, like you keep calling it a business plan, but before you go to those pieces, can we just have the quotes back?
Can I try and answer this?
Go ahead, Councillor St. Pierre.
Right now, I think the struggle is that we can't really get a quote without actually asking the community, based on what council has brought forward, which options should we be getting a quote for. So we don't have an ask. We can't ask for a quote on a product that we don't have any feedback on. So at this point, we would need to engage with the community to find out which of those options would be preferred, and then we could actually go after a quote. But while we're doing that,
that's confusing to me, because why are we asking the public? Because why we're here in the first place is because we're going to, like, we're on the path of restricting more burning. So what we're doing is we're just delivering an alternative, and that decision is up to us. I don't really understand in this topic why we're going for public consultation.
Through Your Worship, Councillor McMath, it's sort of understanding what the community wants. Would they want 1 day a week for drop off for yard waste? Do they want 1 large day a year where they could drop off yard waste? Do they want to pursue that service weekly? Do they want to pursue that service monthly? Once we have a good collective understanding of what the public really desires for that level of service, will allow us to narrow in what we're actually quoting on.
So I'm just looking at it from a different perspective. Rather than asking them what they want, it's what are the price tags associated with the different levels of service, and what's actually affordable or feasible for us to provide in lieu of preventing burning during the season.
Through your worship to Councillor McMath, so you've just indicated what levels of service. So would you like quotes for us to set up something at the yard weekly, bi-weekly, monthly? That's what we're trying to determine because they're all going to have a different price tag.
Yeah, so I would like a quote for 3 different versions of this. So a quote for if it's weekly, a quote for if it's monthly, and a quote if it's for 3 times a year.
I think that's helpful. I'll just sort of, though, the thing is, not every, the yard waste that, not all of it can be burned. And so even if we still allowed burning to remain as is, like your grass clippings or the dead plant or whatever, the foliage, none of that can be burned. So then sometimes, depending on the scale of it, it's too much to compost. So then where do you go? And this is where you see it sort of here, there, and everywhere. And that's where some, you know, I have sometimes put some of it into my organics bin because like where else does it go? Or then you tarp it and someone takes it all away. None of that could be burned. So you're still going to have yard waste that needs to be dealt with somewhere. It can't be burned anyway. It's not burnable. Councillor St. Pierre, then La Jeunesse.
Regardless of what level the quotes come into, still the taxpayers are going to be paying for it. And that's what community engagement is for. Same as the tree bylaw, same as the building bylaw. We're basically looking at, you know, community engagement because that's what we do, and we put in new services and ask people to pay more.
Okay, Councillor La Jeunesse, and then I'll go back to Councillor McMath, and then sort of need to come up with a decision here. Councillor Bateman after McMath.
Yeah, I think, yeah, to go and ask for a quote or for quotes on any of this would be premature at this point because we don't really, we need to have something very specific in order to go out and ask for a quote on it. Like we could, staff might be able to come up with a very general estimate of what the various options would cost. And we could take that to the public for consultation, but to ask for a quote now would be premature, I would think.
Yeah, Councillor McMath.
So that's what I want. I want a general quote for those 3 stages or scenarios. And if you go to the public, so first of all, the communicating with the public is a struggle right now, and the engagement piece is not there. We're really struggling with that. So then to add among the many big ticket items that are coming down the pipe, to add that onto things that they need to be educated and engaged on, I think is like way too big of an ask. It's also if they ask for something and then it turns out we can't deliver it because of the financial impacts, then it'll be for naught. So rather than approach it that way, I would just rather have a basic quote on 3 scenarios. So then at least we have some sort of picture of what we're working with and what we can actually afford.
Yeah, that makes sense. I'm seeing nods from staff. Mr. Carter?
Yeah, through your worship to council, we can provide some general estimates. What the challenge is there is an existing company right now that does take yard waste. It is going to be very difficult to apply a set unit rate to all residents in town for them to come down and provide the service for everyone to drop off. Some will be opposed to it because a lot of people will be burning under regulations on site, and some will be composting their materials. So what we're able to do is we could provide a quote on what it would take for staff to set up a transfer at our yard, as well as to staff our yard during those frequencies. But it is absolutely impossible to determine the quantity of materials that we will get. We could come up with generic estimates on what it would take to staff during those frequencies and to set up means to transfer the material out. How much we would have to transfer, how much would come in, those would be just best estimates that we could give. And all we could do is establish generic unit rates for what we would charge individuals to drop off. It's not an exact science. You can go, here's a fixed price, here's a quote, this is what it will cost. It will be a bit of a trial and error basis, but it will be on sort of generic scenarios, and that's what the business plans would essentially investigate for that one stream. So it's a very difficult one to get set prices on, not to divert away from getting quotes, Councillor McMath, but it's not an exact science on that, and you will not be able to determine the exact quantities that would be coming down to the yard. We can quote on and provide prices on how much to set it up and to facilitate transfers and generic unit rates, but it's very difficult to set exact prices on these things.
Good. Okay, Councillor Bateman, did you have a final comment? Thought I saw
Yeah.
your hand.
I do.
Go ahead, please. Lost you, Councillor Bateman. Is Councillor Bateman there?
Your worship, I do not see him. It looks like he may have lost his connection momentarily. Hopefully.
Okay, I just want, there's just one item from the public here in regards to but I think we had resolved that we're not reading out any of the correspondence. Or was council thinking that was specific to the tree bylaw correspondence? We have one item in regards to this agenda item. Councillor Bateman, have you returned?
Is
I have returned.
Okay.
But I think we've moved on.
No, I was just
But
trying
it's
to.
not important. I just want.
Okay, we'll go ahead, Councillor. Nothing?
Are we still on the.
We're still on the waste management, yes.
Okay, I'd just like to see a report come through on those three items we've discussed. I agree. I think Councillor McMath is concerned about spending $75,000. Hopefully this won't cost nearly that much. And, you know, we're an aspirational zero waste community, I believe, in all but name. And these are, I think the public engagement piece, as it was with the tree bylaw, is a wonderful opportunity to educate. And those people who do take the survey will discover things like the CRD Recyclopedia, where you can go and find out exactly where you take any number of household items for recycling. So yeah, please go ahead with that report if indeed we're recommending that.
Okay, so I think staff are clear now on the items that we wanted something back on. So just look then that the committee of the whole recommend council endorse a plan to develop I don't know quite how to word this resolution now that we've taken some stuff out. So I'm looking to our corporate officer or to a member of council. Councillor Logans, go ahead.
I was going to say we can rewind to when Mr. Carter stated what he thought we expected, because that was pretty much bang on.
Yeah.
I've drafted a motion if I can share my screen for a moment.
Yes, please go ahead.
Not sharing.
I don't see it. Does anyone else see it?
Not I. There we go. Something's happening now.
Okay. So that the committee of the whole recommend council direct staff to investigate and report back on collection and disposal options for yard waste, toxic waste, and large items. And so at this point, since I can't see you, if a member of council can move that.
So moved.
Moved.
Okay, so moved by Councillor Logans. Is there anything further on this item? We've had a lot of discussion here. And so I'm not hearing or seeing anyone, and I don't see all of council. So I'm going to ask staff to turn your videos off, please. Thank you very much for being with us. And that should bring me, okay, so what I'll do is I'll ask if anyone is opposed first. And if anyone is opposed, say nay. Okay, it's just because you're not all on my screen yet. And so now I'll go to all those in favor, please. And if you could raise your hands. Okay, so I'm seeing that's unanimous then. Okay, thank you for bearing with me in this way. Okay, so that concludes item 5.1. And next we go to 5.2, which is the tree management. So I'll turn this back over to staff, please.
Thank you, Your Worship. It's me again. I will share my screen. Or not. Hold on. There we go. Can everybody see my screen now, Your Worship?
Yes, I can. Thank you.
Perfect.
Are you able just to make it larger, like to go, because I can see all your headers and your sidebars, if you can enlarge it or just go into,
How about that?
That's perfect. Thank you.
Perfect. There we go. So thank you, Your Worship. This report summarizes the work that's been completed to date for the development of draft tree management bylaw, and it includes a summary of the engagement from the online survey and stakeholder input. I'd like you to note that this report, although it includes the draft bylaw that was it's included in your package. It's not staff's intent to have the council provide general direction. No, sorry, not staff's intent to discuss the individual comments on the bylaw, but rather provide council a general idea of what was given to stakeholders so that we can then move forward with a general purpose and intent of the next stage of the bylaw development as appropriate. So, benefits of trees. This isn't new information to anyone, but I thought it was important to set the stage so that we understand that carbon sequestration and climate change mitigation is a really important role of trees. It also provides natural wildlife habitat, but also they do a lot of function for our community in natural asset management. They absorb rainwater, they provide improved air quality, and they also provide heating and cooling to our neighborhoods. But also, trees are a part of Souk's identity. They provide aesthetic and quality of life and many health benefits. Just as a bit of context, this is a Google Earth shot from 1984, and it's Souk back before incorporation. This shot shows Souk in 2018. We know from studies that were conducted by the CRD and the Land Conservancy that Souk lost about 255 hectares of forest land between 1986 and 2010 approximately. So the impact of development and deforestation is clear in these ortho photos. As I mentioned, trees provide Souk's identity, or where the rainforest meets the sea, there's a tree on our emblem. The community has, in the recent past, expressed concerns about large-scale removals on private properties and large-scale removals of trees on development sites. There's also concern about the timing of these removals on nesting birds. And I don't just mean the large raptors or migratory birds, but the songbirds and the smaller animals that live in the trees. Also, there's concerns about the impacts of tree removals adjacent to the ocean and removals of trees adjacent to streams. And that gives the stage of how we've gotten here today. So the background is that in 2018, Councillor Parkinson prepared a notice of motion, and with giving staff direction to prepare a draft bylaw. In addition, in 2019, Souk declared a climate emergency, and we were therefore given direction to come back with a draft bylaw based on public engagement. In addition, Council has endorsed the Climate Action Committee's work plan, which includes the development of a draft bylaw for tree management, but also you've endorsed the 2020 Parks and Trails Master Plan, which also highlights this as a key deliverable. So the purpose of the engagement was to draft a practical, enforceable, and environmentally responsible tree management bylaw for the public, for public and private land. And so staff went forward with public engagement and stakeholder engagement based on that purpose to determine what elements of a tree protection bylaw are palatable to a community, if any at all. We engaged in the 1st of November in a public survey, and I'll get into the details of that in a moment. And based on that survey, we as staff drafted a bylaw. Phase 2 included stakeholder input, and we're at phase 3 right now. So the participation of the public survey was quite intensive by all accounts. We had 703 visitors to the website and 532 respondents. Of single family dwellings, that's about, I believe, 9.5% of the single family, of dwelling units that responded to that survey, or about 4% of the population. Just to get a bit of context on the type of people, the type of residents that we heard from, is that we heard from predominantly property owners that live and reside on one property. We also heard from some renters, from some people out of town, people who live on one property and own several, or even people who don't necessarily live in Souk but own properties. So we had a wide range of interested parties filling out that survey. We also had input from people from the development and industry representatives, tree experts and professional contractors, and 70% of our residents. And we also had a pretty nice split on the size of lot. So less than a half an acre, 40% of the respondents reported living on smaller lots, while about 35% of the respondents suggested that they lived on those larger lots. Here's where it gets interesting. The results of the survey, by face value, show that we're pretty split in the community on the ideas of strengthening tree management and regulatory tools. This bar graph really tells it all. So that's why we've come back to you today. The public survey showed in pretty much every question, which is available in the attachment to your agenda, is that the community is very not divisive, but has a lot of conflicting opinions on where we should move with tree management, or if we should move at all. And these 3 pie charts that you see in front of you are just 3 examples of that real split in the community on this subject. Also in the comments, of which we received for the public survey in excess of 900 and individual comments, they're also equally diverse and giving different opinions on where we should move in this tree management prospect. But clearly there's some emerging themes. The community wants the bylaw or some other regulatory tool that we may choose to develop to be concise and fair. Most feel that it should lie within the development process and not within the individual landowners of single family lots. Most believe that development should be retaining an existing percentage of trees on the site, and that tree management should not be a barrier to development, but rather enhance that development. There is also an emerging idea that we should be protecting the very large trees throughout the district, regardless of where they occur. And overwhelmingly, and this is the one place where we had consistency in the opinions of our community, is that education and giveaways really is what we need to do to increase the urban forest. So staff is coming to council today to seek further direction on the purpose. We need to redefine our purpose. We need to get some clarity on what we want the next stage of engagement to be, and focus that engagement on the purpose that council provides to staff. And it's that purpose-based feedback that's really what we need from the community in order to move forward. And from there, we can develop the appropriate tools, whether it be a tree management bylaw, whether it be something related to development only, it could be a policy, etc. But that is what staff is really thinking the next stage should be for council to consider. So, Your Worship, I'll send this back to you for discussion, and here are the two resolutions in front of you today.
That's great. Thank you very much, Ms. Hooper, for all that your work that you've done on this, and it's been a lot, and we certainly appreciate it, and just all the work that you've done with the limitations of COVID that we now have. So I can see that there. So maybe just ask that if you could please stop sharing your screen, and then I'll open it up to council for some comments. Okay, Councillor Logans, I see your hand. Go ahead, please.
Yay, I'm so glad that this day is finally here. Thank you so much, Ms. Cooper and staff, for putting this draft together. I will admit, as excited as I am about this, there are a lot of things that need to change with it, as I'm sure everyone knows. It's not a secret, but it's an excellent start, I think. And what I'm really hoping that we all get from this is a good starting point for a growing community, because the tree bylaws will change. I know, for instance, Oak Bay just changed theirs so that a tree now costs $2,000 to cut down, because their number before was too little and developers were just paying however much it was. And so now they're not clear cutting land as much because there's a higher amount. Anyway, that's a whole other story, but I think we're way far off from that point, and we do need a starting point. So this is it. I do have several questions, but the first comment I wanted to make was, no wonder the survey was split, because that survey, to me, it didn't show that we needed a purpose. Rather, it showed that we need to inform people on what is actually within this bylaw. For instance, one of the letters we received recently from the Linnells stated that they were completely opposed to this bylaw for the reason that they wanted to be able to remove dangerous trees from their property. Well, that's exactly what this bylaw allows, is for people to remove dangerous trees from their property. And people keep saying over and over they want to be able to remove dangerous trees from their property, and they 100% should be able to. And so that's the kind of feedback that isn't helpful in this situation, because now these folks have a negative perception of our bylaw, and now we have extra work to do to prove to them that it's a worthy bylaw. And so I'm actually extremely disappointed with the survey, and I don't believe we can really trust any of those results, because it seems to me that it was taken by folks who were confused by what the bylaw was even about. And there are several sections in it that are very confusing and are too much for anyone to understand. And so that's, I think, the starting point would be to clean up those sections of the bylaw to make them very easy for developers and for citizens to understand. So a few questions that I had for staff. One would be, and I do know this is a working bylaw, so forgive me for picking out little pieces, but I wanted to know where the number came from in section 2.7, which was about the critical root zone. I'll actually go back to Mr. Linnell's letter from earlier that stated something along the lines of when there are developments, the machinery will just trample all of the roots and destroy the trees. And that's completely true, especially in a critical root zone of only 6, the tree multiplied by 6. So I did wonder where that came from, because even in the Schedule B, was it? No. In the Schedule A of our bylaw, where we just copied an example from Duncan's example is 18, and that's a higher, on the higher end of other municipalities. I've seen between 10 and 18, so I just wanted to know where we arrived at 6 and what the thought process was there.
Through your worship to Councillor Logans, the rationale was, this is just a draft, and it was a starting point for conversation. And what we will expect to do is go into industry standards and see what's palatable. So as I say, this is just the draft part of that, and we can redefine that.
Thanks. That actually helps because it might help clarify quite a bit of this bylaw. And I applaud you for putting out a starting point. I think that's fantastic. I think we just need more clarity in the community. But one thing that I'm hoping this bylaw can actually be is a fallback so that we have, these are the maximum requirements, not the minimum. These are the maximum. And when we have people that say, I can't do that because if I multiply this by 18, I'm hitting up against this line and it won't be able, we can't do it. And that's when we say, that's okay. We understand this is an exception. We can do 6, right? So by putting in 6, we then allow, we kind of negate anything that requires more than that and kill a lot of trees in doing so. And by putting 6 into the bylaw, we also allow people to say, well, how about 0? Right, so I think it's just a bit low for that particular one. But yeah, it's good to know that looking at industry standards will be a next step. One question I did have through your worship to Ms. Hooper was, we do have a ratio for trees, but why don't we have a dollar value attached? And I know that can get sticky because, again, as I mentioned with Oak Bay, we definitely don't want to go in the high end of like $2,000 per protected tree. But if we can start somewhere, even at like $150, that funding that we get from developments that are cutting down lots of trees, we can put towards putting trees up in our parks and other places in our community.
So through your worship to Councillor Logan, if I understand the question, why did we choose such not use a value instead of a ratio?
Well, I'm wondering why there isn't both, because I think both provides people with an option. Whereas if right now it looks like it's written, if you're not able to replace the tree at this ratio, then you can't cut it down. Whereas it'd be nice to say, if you need to cut it down, give us $150.
Okay. So that's exactly the intention. And further to your comments about needing more clarity, that was staff's intention, so that if you couldn't do the replacement at whatever ratio council just considered appropriate, then there could be the option for a replacement cost. Now, I will also mention that even though the survey had its issues, there was a lot of comment about the cost of those replacement values. And so just something to consider as we go into further engagement.
Yeah, and that's an excellent point, because I think that's where we just need a bylaw that is a good starting point for our community. And as our community grows, we can change that, right? I don't think we need to push too far into the future here, but I think we do need to get a good starting point. So that's a great point, Ms. Hooper, thank you. Another question I had was about the calculations for the DBH, which was under 212, I think. Yeah, 212. How on earth did this get so complicated? I don't know where this came from, because I think it's a pretty simple measurement in other municipalities.
Through your worship to Councillor Logan's, it's complicated only because when it's generally a circumference that you're measuring on a large tree, it's very easy. It's the circumference of a tree divided by pi. But it's when you have multi-stemmed trees, that's where it gets complicated, and that's what you're seeing in that definition.
Right, and so I think where I agree, but I think what happens is that when you have a property now with several, like a lot full of multi-stem trees, now you have staff on the ground, if we staff, later down the road, that are spending hours upon hours doing calculations when they could simply take like the 3 largest trees and do the calculations on those stems, on like the 3 largest stems or something like that. So yeah. I think like this calculation is probably the most complicated I've seen, and it's things like this that scares people, because it's like more and more money and more time that's required to get the desired result. Again, I think this is a perfect example of making things simpler. Will make it easier for the public to understand, and hopefully we can come to an understanding with them and make it easier. My next question was about, I'm almost done, I promise. Part 2 under the application and exemptions. There were some public comments on this, and I was curious as well, where did the 1 hectare come from? Trees with the community growth area as defined by the district's official community plan on lots with less than 1 hectare, an area less than 1 hectare.
So through your worship to Councillor Logans, honestly, it was developed based on the fact that a larger lot, such as something over 1 hectare, would have development potential. It was so that we could exclude some of these smaller lots, the moms and the pops who are just managing their own smaller lots, but really push it towards that development potential and subdivision. And that's where the community input came, is that it's really about the development. It's really not necessarily about you and I managing dangerous trees in our backyard or managing our small woodlots.
Thank you. I think that like this point here is one of the absolute key points that I want the community to see and to understand, because I completely agree that that's our intent with this, is to manage the protected trees everywhere, but then in larger lots have that applicable. So I don't know if there's a way that we can like highlight certain things that perhaps had come up repeatedly from the public within this bylaw, but that might be a good one to highlight, because again, when we look at the survey and it says people are opposed, one of the reasons they're opposed is exactly touches on that exactly, where it's written in here. They just don't understand it and or don't see it. That's why I just don't trust the survey results on that. I think that was it. I might have one more question. Sorry, bear with me 1 second. Oh, yes. And maybe just a comment, actually, again, on the subject of making things simpler. Schedule B, I know it was a copy and paste, but the table that we have with the 3 columns can be extremely easier as well, and just say like, if you need to replace with a coniferous tree, get a 10-gallon pot. That's something that people can easily throw in the back of their truck. It's not anything too complicated. People can understand that language. And if it's a deciduous tree, then we can put in a specific measurement, but just make it one measurement and something simple and easy, instead of going into all of these calculations that now someone has to sit down and try to figure out. And then it makes it easy too, because someone's at the hardware or at the plant store calls up districts and says, hey, is this something that will work? And you can just say yes and move on.
Okay, thank you very much, Councillor Logans. I'll move on to our list here. We have Councillor Beddoes, then St. Pierre, then Bateman. So go ahead, Councillor Beddoes.
Yeah, I understand we're still in the question stage. Is that correct?
Well, we're in committee of the whole, and I've been a bit of a slacker as chair. So if you need to make a comment to frame your question, then go ahead, because I have allowed Councillor Logans to do that.
I'll start off with some questions. And it said in your survey that basically it's a development process that the people are upset with, as opposed to individual lots. Is that a correct analysis?
Through your worship to Councillor Beddoes, generally speaking, yes. It's because there's so many different results from the survey. It's really where the comments are coming to roost, is that it's really about the development process. Generally speaking, yes.
Okay, with that being said, then what is is a normal homeowner with a half-acre lot, are they exempt from the tree bylaw?
Through your worship, unless they have an ocean front lot or have a stream on their property, they are, yes, exempt from the bylaw.
Because that's not how I read it, and maybe I am misinformed, and maybe that goes back to Councillor Logan's comments that it was very, very difficult to understand who it applied to and who it did. So what is the threshold for a lot in Souk to be exempt? Is it 1 hectare?
Through your worship, if you are in the urban growth area of the OCP and you are larger than 1 hectare, the bylaw would apply to you.
So anything under 1 hectare is not applicable. They would not be concerned with this then.
That's correct, nor would any rural zones.
Okay. Well,
It's
there's-
complicated.
Well, I know it's complicated, and that's the whole problem, and that's why I've been getting a great deal of pushback on it, is people do not understand exactly what's going on here. And even those ones with over a hectare, and there's a lot of properties in Souk which have that thing, over a hectare, and if they want to take down a tree, they have to get permits and all. But how much would it cost, you're in the business, for an arborist to come to my house and give me an assessment on a tree that is 2 feet in diameter? What would be the ballpark figure what that would cost to have an arborist come there? Never mind cutting it down, because I'll have to do a tree faller for that.
So it varies by company, through your worship, to Councillor Beddoes, but I would expect that that's somewhere between $100 and $200, depending on the company and the amount of time they have to travel. It's just an estimate. Some companies, if you want an arborist report, that's what it would cost.
Okay, because I have a letter here from an individual that said it's between 400 and 1,000. Is that out to lunch?
For one tree, I won't argue, but I would think that would be a 3 quotes is required at that stage to get a competitive price.
And then you'd have to get a permit. You'd have to have somebody from our staff look at it. Okay, I'm in the question answering stage right now. I'm not sure what we're trying to do here is other than anger a lot of people, and that seemed to be very successful in that portion of it, at least from what I've heard. I do appreciate the work you put into it. Don't get me wrong. I don't want to take it personal, because we did ask you to do this. I mean, that was us making that request. But does not the development process and our staff, when they get a development permit or a project coming through, isn't that all talked about anyways, and what trees to take out, what trees to leave? So maybe that's where we need to be looking at, and not a tree bylaw that affects all these other people. And there's a lot that is affecting. I just have a really great deal of trouble with any of this. And you have to hire somebody to come and tell you how to plant 5 trees, where you plant 5 trees, how much does that cost? And how much does the permit cost? How much staff time does it take? I mean, none of those figures are here. And to me, I see it as we'd have to hire just a couple extra staff to look after this, and never mind about hiring a separate arborist to come in. So I'm really frustrated with what we have here in front of us today. I don't think it looks at the problem that the people of Souk wanted us to look at, and that was these wholesale slaughter of trees on an entire hillside. And to come down for those smaller property owners, I really am not happy with the way it's written at this moment. I'll leave it for that for the moment. Let other people have their comments.
Okay, thank you very much. I'll go to Councillor St. Pierre, then Councillor Bateman.
Thank you very much, Your Worship. I would agree with Councillor Beddoes and Councillor Logans. I was fortunate in that Ms. Hooper was able to come to the Climate Action Committee, and so I got a preview and got the scoop on what the language was, but I know that I was very confused, and people that were actually quite clever about looking at bylaws were also confused. And so it's no wonder that the public at this point is confused. I do think that at this point in time, given that we have such a break in terms of public opinion, we're going to have to go back to the public with some clarity in order to actually really sort out what's going to happen here. One of my questions, I've got many questions here, but the first one would be around the actual resolution that we have before us, which is that the Committee of the Whole recommend that Council direct staff to develop a purpose-based engagement strategy for the tree management. Now, I have to interpret that myself at this point in time because I'm not sure what it means. But purpose-based for me in this particular case would have to focus in on what's the purpose of the tree management bylaw, and then going to the public with some clarity around what we're trying to accomplish. Now, I'd like to maybe get a response from staff on that because I'm not clear.
So through your worship to Councillor St. Pierre, that's exactly the case. So what we need, in staff's opinion, need to do is to really hone in on the intention. So if it's, as Councillor Beto suggests, and really how we're going to stop the wholesale slaughter of trees on in our development lands, then we can then, as staff, based on that purpose to reduce those clear cuts, is go to stakeholders and the public and ask directed questions related to that. The existing survey that we used had more general questions and didn't really hone the craft as well as we needed it to. So that is what we're asking for today, is give us some direction. If you just want us to focus on development sites, whether it be in the town center or not, or in whatever, we can then determine an appropriate survey and the appropriate tools, whether it be a council policy or a staff policy or a policy of some sort or a bylaw, and we'll go from there.
Thank you. I'd like to follow up on that question or on that answer. So I assume that might be the intent. I wasn't sure, but I assume that might be the intent. And in terms of realizing that intent, I don't understand why the bylaw focuses on inside the OCP's core area, because as we can see from the satellite photo, a lot of trees are going down outside of that. Now, if we're looking at protecting ecosystems, if we're looking at sequestration, if we're looking at natural asset management, I don't actually understand why the bylaw would restrict itself in that particular way if that's our purpose. So I would love some clarity from the public and just in general around that. But it seems to me that if we have those purposes, then we shouldn't be restricting ourselves inside that area. As a matter of fact, I would probably get strung up for saying this in certain circles, but within the growth area, that's where more trees need to come down. And that's where we need the density and population. It's far better to protect large swaths of trees outside the growth area, keep those ecosystems intact, sequester more carbon with mature trees, would be my thought, if that's our purpose. If we want to keep iconic trees within, I can certainly see that, but I think we have to be very clear with our purpose. And I don't think that was necessarily the case at the outset with the survey or the bylaw at this point in time. Something else that came forward for me was just the idea of, if we have a purpose to actually do these many things, then replacement of trees is not actually as effective as protection. And protection of trees outside of the core may be better. So for example, if we can actually take monies that are put forward for trees and actually purchase lands, as has been suggested, has been happening with the CRD, they purchase lands to protect lands. So if we purchase lands, that's the best way to protect those trees in a long period. If we have monies that are being set aside and we can actually increase our parklands, increase our opportunities for tourism, increase our number of trails, that might be something that the community could actually see advantages to. Now, I also feel that we really need to be looking at common ground. I think almost everyone wants to avoid large clear cuts on areas that are going to denude slopes, cause erosion, and cause major issues. And I think that's where natural asset management comes in. I don't want to see taxpayers or the district having to pay huge sums for permanent man-made infrastructure to replace a certain number of trees. Now, that means you actually need to bring in experts to say, well, that 30% has to be over here because those are the trees that are actually protecting your water table, keeping the erosion from happening, and providing all the natural asset management. So if you don't do that, you're going to have to put in more storm sewers. You're going to have to put in other things, and it's going to cost us money. I think we need to be looking at this very pragmatically. I don't see why the district or homeowners or other property owners should be on the line if a developer decides that they want to cut down the wrong trees. And I believe that should be one of our purposes with the tree management bylaw, is to make sure we're not on the hook, paying long-term costs because development is happening. I think that's most of what I was hoping to find out. I think I just mostly talked though. So thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much, Councillor St. Pierre. So go to Councillor Bateman, please.
Okay, thank you. I agree with Councillor Logans. This is a great starting point. Councillor Parkinson would be happy to know that we're moving ahead with this and discovering what every other community in Canada, possibly worldwide, that has attempted a tree management bylaw. It is split. It is always split. There are individualists and those who are interested in the common good. And you know, it's happened again and again and again. And as Councillor Logan stated at the outset there, our problem with that survey, as much as we've got a ton of raw material to work with, it did not have the bylaw attached. I don't believe. I think the bylaw was released after the survey. So regardless, I think just get some clarity here through you to Ms. Hooper. This is a particularly lenient tree bylaw compared to most. Is that correct? I mean, given that it doesn't apply to properties under a hectare, 2.5 acres, or any lot outside the CGA. Do you have, here's a question, do you have a sense of how many properties in Souk actually are over a hectare in size in the CGA?
Through your worship to Councillor Bateman, yeah, we did a GIS exercise. In this case, there would be 502 properties that would be impacted by this bylaw. Okay, okay. Now, in terms of this kind of challenge that communities are invariably split, I looked up Burlington, for example. It took 9 years for them to get a tree bylaw settled. And the final piece was to recognize the difference between the urban forest and their rural community. So they finally got that, but there are councillors on the Burlington Council who continue to criticize it and say we should have done a full urban forest strategy or a canopy, an investigation of our desired canopy, the loss of canopy, all these various items. I had a question around estimated staff time that would be required to administer and enforce this bylaw. Do you have a sense? Through your worship to Councillor Bateman, no, it wasn't something that we pursued because we didn't have a good quality draft bylaw for council to consider and move forward with. It was kind of what we felt to be a little bit of a cart before the horse in estimating those things. But once we get a good sense of what this bylaw is going to look like, then we can attribute those items to it. Right. Okay. I was interested. I know that all trees with 100 centimeter DBH are to be protected. Now, 100 centimeters is big. What you settled on that? Because that's kind of a maiden suit provision, would it be? Through your worship to Councillor Bateman, yes, we used what other municipal, we looked at a lot of different bylaws in South Vancouver Island all the way up to Courtenay, and we have a lot of very large trees. And so we came up with the 100 centimeters because we looked around the community and saw that there was a lot of pretty significant trees that were about that size and larger, and just based on feedback. Okay, I think if I recall Councillor Parkinson's, she was particularly irked about the clear cuts or the massacres, as Councillor Beddoes puts it, or the wholesale slaughter. I guess the question is, there is a clause in your bylaw that states no person shall cut or damage any protected tree on a site that requires a development permit or subdivision until such time as the permit is issued. Now that seems to be such a critical piece that can it exist outside of this bylaw, and can we as a policy get that happening sooner rather than later? Through your worship to Councillor Bateman, currently as it stands, we would need either a policy or a bylaw to protect those trees. We see it very frequently where clearing and grading is happening before subdivision is even applied for. I would not be able to give you a firm answer until we look at all the legal ends of it to see what mechanisms are necessary based on what council wants. It may be that a council policy is enough that we can point to it as we go into subdivision development permit. But as it stands, staff have no tools to stop that. And I think that's what we need.
Okay, thank you. So Councillor Lajeunesse is next, please.
I'm back. So, yeah, I appreciate the effort that's gone into this, but I honestly don't see the need for it. I think
Just sorry to interrupt, Councillor. I just need everyone to mute. I can hear a lot of background noise here.
I would estimate that the majority of those 500 large properties are owned by families who have owned them for generations and have managed the forest lands on them quite well over the years. And the fact that we've seen deforestation ensue since the 80s is a result of the development that's happened. And when you take a large property and you take all the trees off it, which is what has happened in a few of the areas, including Sun River, yeah, it looks ugly when it's first done. But if you look at Sun River now, years later, when gardens have been planted and trees have been planted, the greenery comes back. We live in a rural community. We're surrounded by parks and protected areas, and I can see protecting the riparian areas, and I just think that I don't see why we need a tree bylaw to do that. Is that not something that can be covered in the OCP and through zoning? That's my question.
I think the question there is, and I think that's where Ms. Hooper said it could be a type of policy or something other in the development process. Could you elaborate, Ms. Hooper, a bit on which tool?
Through your worship, I truly can't nod and speak intelligently about it. I would have to defer to planning. Currently, we have development permits as part of the OCP, but it doesn't cover all of the particular nuances of development. So it's something definitely that we can look into and report back to you on.
Anything else, Councillor Lajeunesse?
No, I think that's good. I can't support this at all. I'm sorry.
Okay, Councillor McMath.
I think when we asked for this originally to get information and get educated, it was a different time than it is right now. We're not capable of having proper community engagement, and the survey, everyone, regardless about how they feel about the tree bylaw coming forward, the survey, it caused a lot of damage in the community. I had a couple of questions. The $5,000 given for community engagement, can you give me a breakdown of how that was spent?
Through your worship to Councillor McMath, currently we did pay Othello, which was the host provider for the community survey, $2,500. And I believe in your report it talks about small sums of money, i.e. I think $40 or $50 for Google survey, Google advertisement. So I would expect we're probably at about $2,800 at the moment.
Can you tell me how Othello makes their surveys?
I can give you a little bit of information based on my only one experience with this one. We provide the questions to Othello, and then they generate it. And in this situation, we used very similar questions, not 100% similar, as the city of Courtenay did when they were recently developing their tree management bylaw in 2017.
So because a large portion of your presentation is based off like the results of the survey, but if we're following that path, which I don't think we should at all, but if we are, then the majority doesn't want tree bylaw or management to come forward. So if we disregard the survey completely, which I think we should, what we're looking at if we zoom out of here is what are we dealing with right now as a community and what is the priority? Not that I'm completely anti having some sort of tree management This is just, the process has done a lot of damage, and it's just not the priority for the community right now. What we do have is an economic crisis. And when we speak to things like carbon emissions, one of the things that we can focus on rather than this is retaining local employment and cultivating jobs here so that 75% of the population isn't commuting. There's other strategies here. I also know we don't have the resources or staffing or the money to execute a full tree bylaw. And then everybody at this table also says that they are for affordable housing and want to support it, but the development community is not going to eat the price on the cost of this. They're going to pass that on. And so ultimately it's just going to be people who are trying to get into the housing market that pay for it. So I think we've kind of touched on it a little bit. There's other avenues to obtain what it is that we're looking for. And that's, again, that's not staff's fault at all. That's council's fault, where we're lacking in providing you with direction. And then again, going through what is our strategy with the community now, because it's not the same as it was 3, 4, 6 months ago. So that has changed. And that's something that we need to talk about right now. I think this is something that should be shelved. And until we're able to actually complete meaningful community engagement, it shouldn't go any further.
Okay, thank you, Councillor McMath. For myself, I just want to thank staff for all the work they've done on this. It's been an ongoing item that's been perking about our community, but I've never actually seen it unfold. So there's been talk, or over the years anyway, residents have asked, you know, what's happened to this or that, and why isn't, you know, why did this or that get cut down? Well, we don't have a tree bylaw. Well, we should put one in. So there's been a talk, well, we need a tree bylaw, and then so now here we are having this discussion about what it potentially looks like. So I think it's great that council has taken the bold, brave step forward to say, okay, if we were to do this, what would it look like, and what is the problem that we're trying to solve, and actually hear the difficult feedback from the community, as opposed to, oh, I don't want people angry with me, so I'm not going to bring it up. In this case, we have. And yes, some folks are upset, and maybe others are neutral and others are happy, but at least we've gone out and asked the question, do we need a tree bylaw? What do you think? And they've responded with their sentiments of all sides. So I think it was a bold and brave decision of council to actually step into that conversation as best as we could in this setting. For myself, is this the tool that we're looking for? So in some developments, we've seen the developer retain significant trees, retain the trees that maybe have some nesting birds in them to enhance and add to the overall property. Others have just blasted everything apart, and then we'll start fresh and maybe we'll plant some stuff back. In other places, I'll use Mariners Village, for example. Now this site was relatively cleared when the development started, but they've retained the beautiful oak tree, the shoreline trees that are now becoming a bit iconic to that site, and I think would add character to it once that property actually develops. We're seeing a lot of heritage trees around our community that folks have nurtured for generations in hopes of keeping, as well as some large beautiful trees here and there, because they add to they just add to the overall landscape. So part of it for myself is, okay, it's more about that you know, the concern of residents when an area behind them is fully cleared. So that's where it's like, what is the appropriate tool to use in those early development discussions? You know, we've had folks, as we've heard here, for generations that have been very good stewards of the land, and we want to encourage that and not make managing their property owners or difficult. I don't think that was ever the intent here. However, that is the reaction that we're seeing. So this is the challenge, is doing the engagement or getting the information out. This is where it'd be lovely in a different reality, is you would have a town hall and you would hear the different opinions from our community resonate, but it's just impossible to do it at this time. For myself, I am sort of with Councillor McMath, like, we shelve it until you can actually do that engagement. However, in the meantime, what other policy can we look at with lands that are coming up for development? We've seen over the years where large strands of trees have been cut down. The downstream property owners are now getting flooded. It's a civil matter, but they're flooded. Their house has been damaged now because of all the water that's coming in. Now, sure, when the areas get developed, everything heals. But I mean, that's extreme havoc on some of our residents that they would have to face that. So that's where, and then there are iconic trees around our community that I think do add to the character. So it's just looking for, like, what is the problem? It always comes back to, with a bylaw, what is the problem we're trying to solve here? And is this the most effective tool to do it? And I agree that the more simple, the better, because it is hard to read this document here. So, in terms of the recommendation, part of me just says we receive it for information. But then in terms of moving forward, what does that look like? So now that we've all had an opportunity to speak, I'm going to return to Councillor Logans, please.
Yeah, I think it's good to hear everyone's perspective on this, because I think it does reflect the perspective of the community. We have to remember that the survey, a lot of the no's were from people whose concerns were addressed already by the bylaw. I know that this isn't the right bylaw for us, and I think staff knows that, and all of council knows that. There are a lot of things that need to be changed, but I don't think this needs to be shelved, because honestly, there's a lot we can change with it to make it very simple, that does not require input, because we've already heard it. We know what the issues are, and we know ways of making it simpler. And we don't have to move full speed ahead and full throttle on this, but we have a good base, and it would be silly to throw it away. But if we can take our time with it and make it a lot simpler, I think that would be a good next step.
Okay, that's great. Councillor St. Pierre, I saw your hand.
Thank you. I'm in agreement with Councillor Logans on this. I happen to think that what would be really useful would be a fact sheet. I think we need to simplify the language, but then also answer some of the questions that came up the most often. We are also we have COVID happening right now, but we're also in a climate emergency. And people ask, when's the best time to plant a tree? Well, it was 10 years ago. So, when's the best time to have a tree management bylaw? Probably about 10 years ago. Mostly because that allows you to actually save the trees that really need saving. It allows you to do more good. I don't really want us to have a tree bylaw in 5 to 10 years that has to get really weird about things. And I think that if we do something now with proper input from the community, which I think we do, we had a large number of responses here. I think that what that shows is that when the community cares, either for or against, this is actually quite amazing. I mean, compared to the number of people who come out for an election, it's pretty good. I'd like to see better. We'd all like to see better. But I think that when people care, they do step up. And I think that care, if we just drop it now, we're losing that momentum. I think we should keep on educating the community. I think we should keep on finding out what they want and come to a better place. I think that moving away from this now is not the right move.
Okay, Councillor McMath, and then I'm going to look for a resolution. Councillor McMath, then Councillor.
Councillor St. Pierre touched on the climate crisis, but what's more pressing to this community right now, in my opinion, is the economic crisis. And so if you go out to your community, what's their biggest grief right now? What's their biggest stress? It's what they're experiencing through COVID right now. And that's the support that they need. The survey just added to, in my opinion, poor mental health, because we didn't come forward saying like, oh, here, like, this is what we're looking for. We're kind of like wanting to get feedback. It was like, hey, by the way, we're going to throw this tree bylaw out. Good luck. And then now we have people that are panic cutting and that's exactly what we didn't want to happen. And then it has caused sort of a negative response. So while I can appreciate that we have a lot of engagement now, it wasn't cultivated in a positive way. It's not the most pressing issue right now. So shelving it there's no harm in that at all. You're giving your community time, which is what we talked about earlier, where
when we talk about engagement, we talk about reputation and building trust with the community, we have to set ourselves up for success. And by having such a small window, and like this survey doesn't count for anything. Like this, every survey I've ever seen, not just special to this one, is just you're herding cattle to a predetermined location. And that also adds to like the trust issues that we're talking about right now. So what we need to do is we need to have that sit down where we talk about what is the most pressing issue right now. We need to strategize before we start going ahead with like these huge bylaws. This tree bylaw, like the step code getting pushed forward, those items, like they should not be at the front. And that's our fault for not providing direction to staff. And so I'm sorry, Ms. Hooper, when you get a lot of heat for these things, that's not your fault. And we do love you and appreciate all the hard work that you guys do. It's just that with COVID, like the direction and the narrative and the priorities have shifted and council has yet to catch up with that. And so that's what we're responsible for doing now.
Okay, Councillor Bateman.
Okay, I think as I've said before, COVID's not going to last forever. Fingers crossed, right? Vaccines are coming, maybe soon enough. Now, I think that a community can have multiple points of concern. I know we care about healthcare, transportation, the economy, and climate change is a piece, and they all can exist on a spectrum of issues. So we're dealing with an issue here that, again, has split the community. Yeah. It's a split. So I'm thinking I would also suggest that the feedback we've got to date has been fantastic. I mean, maybe it was not handled in the best possible way, but we have received from the anonymous public as well as from some very key stakeholders in our community. In our package tonight, Michael Thornton, Dave Saunders, Transition Souk, I believe it's Dave McClyman in reference to Lannon Creek Park. And I'd like to quote from that. I think that's Dave McClyman, but maybe not. He states, "Thank you for listening to my opinion. I've lived and worked all my life in Souk.